Part 29. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 281. The heavy rain was dripping in the Bluestone Alley. Su Buling held up an oil paper umbrella and led the horse to the outside of the Sun family shop. The old wine shop that had been opened in the alley for who knows how many years was still the same as before, with 3 wine tables, several wine jars, and yellow wine banners swaying in the wind and rain. It was such an ordinary wine shop, but it carried the memories of many people. The current emperor drank here, the Princess Su and the Prince Su were married here, and Ning Qingyi's parents met and fell in love here. The ordinary wine shop with no background, relying on a mouthful of throat-burning strong liquor, connected all kinds of people from all over the world, high and low, like a special safe haven in the world, not belonging to the world but inseparable from it. The drinkers who walked out of the wine shop were half of the world. Sha. The big raindrops hit the oil paper umbrella and slid down from the umbrella ribs. Su Buling came to the fence of the tavern and held out the wine gourd in his hand. "Boss, give me a pot of wine." Because of the heavy rain, there were no customers in the tavern. The old tavern owner's son, who was wiping everywhere, raised his eyes and smiled. "Young master, you are here. Long time no see. Is it still the same as before?" Su Buling chuckled and looked at the Duan Yu Shao that he had been drinking for more than a year and might be hard to drink again in the future. He pondered for a moment. "I heard that the tavern owner has better wine here. I have been here for more than a year and I have never seen the tavern owner take it out." When tavern owner's son heard this, he wiped his hands with a towel. "It's not that I don't want to take it out. This person, once he drinks better, he will drink the broken jade wine again. Yu Shao has lost its flavor. It is better to have a favorite wine to look forward to than never to look forward to it in the future." Su Buling chuckled, "I guess I have to give up Yu Shao. I have to try it so that I won't have any regrets." Shopkeeper's son looked at him for a few times, and was silent for a while. He shook his head and chuckled. "Your father seemed to have said so back then. Never mind, there is still half a jar left. Fill a pot for the young master. If you have a chance to see Xiao Su in the future, no, it should be Lao Su. Ask the old man if he is greedy. I told him not to drink." While talking, shopkeeper's son walked into the back room with a towel, took out half a jar of old wine, poured it into the wine gourd, carefully, and there was a bit of reluctance in the corners of his eyes, like cutting meat. Su Buling stood in the alley holding an umbrella, looking up at the old wine shop. If manager's son is interested in the future, he can open a shop in Suzhou. There is a spring under the city, and its water is like wine. The spring water there is a good thing for making wine. Manager's son filled the wine, shook his head and sighed, "I have opened a wine shop in the alley for a lifetime. Many people have been talking about it for many years, just to come to the capital to taste it. Once the old man leaves, won't they all return disappointed and unable to leave?" Su Buling chuckled and said nothing more. After a while, the wine gourd was full. Su Buling took it and smelled it. The rich wine aroma was refreshing, making people unable to control themselves. However, Su Buling hesitated for a moment, but still did not drink it. He hung the wine gourd around his waist and walked out of the Bluestone Alley with an umbrella. The rain was pouring. Manager's son put a towel on his shoulder and watched the back of the snow-white figure disappear in the rain. The scene seemed familiar. The playboy who was known as the Four Pests of the capital had also walked out of the alley quietly with a pot of wine and never looked back. In a trance, it seemed like a reincarnation. The slightly different thing was that there was no woman beside the young man in white this time. Shopkeeper's son was silent for a long time, and finally sighed softly. In the blink of an eye, another generation has passed. The rainy weather was a little cooler, and the lock dragon Gu naturally calmed down. Su Buling took this opportunity to enter the palace and visit the Queen Mother for the last time. At noon, Su Buling's carriage arrived outside Changal Palace. I thought there would be Jiao Yi and the sedan chair to greet him outside the palace gate, but to Su Buling's great disappointment, there were only a few ugly palace maids standing at the door. There was also a carriage parked outside the palace gate, with a wooden sign with the word Xiao hanging on it. Hua Jingting, the chief steward of the Huainan Xiao family, stood under the eaves to avoid the rain with a folding fan in his hand. Su Buling got off the carriage. Seeing this scene, he naturally understood that Miss Xiao was in the palace, and his mood was a bit complicated. But since he was here, he couldn't just go home. Su Buling got off the carriage and walked into Changal Palace. He was led by the palace maid to the main hall of the Queen Mother's bedroom. The rain outside the palace was rustling with a bit of coolness, and the atmosphere in the main hall was not much better. The moment Su Buling stepped into the main hall, he clearly felt that the atmosphere in the room had changed a little, and it was a bit strangely quiet. Looking up, in the wide and tidy main hall, two beautiful ladies with the same appearance were sitting on the soft couch, with black hair and spring eyes, and a gourd-like enchanting figure that could be seen without deliberately showing it. The dignified sitting posture added a bit of maturity, but the temperament and dress of the two were slightly different. The Queen Mother wore a fiery red phoenix skirt, with gold-lined patterns dotted in between, red palace boots on her feet, a golden hairpin in her hair, her face was brightly made up, and her red lips were as fresh and green as cherries, making people want to take a bite of them. It was obvious that she had dressed up carefully. Xiao Qi wore a black long skirt, plain clothes, and her hair was also the style of an unmarried lady, draped over her back, with only a red hairpin in her hair. Her temperament was much colder and more serious. In contrast, it was like a large ice cube placed next to a flame, two worlds of ice and fire. Even if the two sisters looked exactly the same, they could be clearly distinguished. "Meet the Queen Mother, Miss Xiao." Su Buling remained calm, showing no strange expression, and walked up to him and raised his hand to salute. The Queen Mother was obviously a little flustered, but she was still calm at this time, and nodded with noble manners. "Ling sit down." Xiao Qi's expression was calm, but the embroidered shoes under her skirt moved a few times, revealing the confusion in her heart. She glanced at Su Buling calmly, and nodded politely. "See you, Prince. Miss Xiao, you are welcome." Su Buling smiled and sat on the chair next to the couch, only 2 steps away from the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother suppressed the thousands of thoughts in her heart, but she subconsciously moved to the side, keeping a distance from Su Buling, and said softly, "I heard that you were injured recently. I can't leave the palace to visit you. I have to trouble you to come. Have you felt better recently?" Su Buling chuckled, and his manner was elegant and easygoing. "I'm used to it. Thank you for your concern, Queen Mother." "Oh." The Queen Mother smiled and nodded, then pursed her lips, looked at Su Buling, and quickly turned away, with nothing to say. The main hall fell silent, and the silence was a little scary. The following is a complete plot, which is also the finale of the Chang'an volume. It must be written in one go before it can be posted, so there are only 2 updates today. I hope everyone understands. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 282. The rain hit the corridor, fine and dense. Su Buling looked at the sisters sitting on the soft couch, and it was difficult to speak for a while. The sweet words prepared for the Queen Mother naturally could not be said at this time, and private matters were even more difficult to talk about. And it seemed that there was nothing to say about family matters. Su Buling was called by the Queen Mother. Logically, the Queen Mother asked Su Buling to answer, and he could not take the initiative. The Queen Mother called Su Buling into the palace for the purpose of detoxification. According to the Queen Mother's plan, all the palace maids were sent away. When Su Buling came, even if it was during the day, he would be bullied by Su Buling if he resisted a little, so as not to suffer. But with her sister in front, the Queen Mother would definitely not dare to mess with Su Buling, so there was nothing to do. Xiao Qi, who saw through everything, naturally knew what Su Buling and her sister were up to. She came here to interrupt. Anyway, Su Buling, a wicked man who disregarded the elders and the inferiors, could not be allowed to succeed, and her sister could not be allowed to go astray again. Rustle. The sound of rain came from outside, and the atmosphere in the room became more and more wrong. Xiao Qi saw that the Queen Mother was silent, and smiled softly. Queen Mother, you called Prince Su over, why don't you say anything? The Queen Mother had a lot to say, but she didn't dare to say it. She raised her hand and gently hooked the hair hanging down from her temples, pretending to be dignified and generous. I was worried about Linger's injury, and I was relieved to see that he was fine. Xiao Qi nodded, and turned to look at Su Buling, who was calm. In this case, I will send the prince back to the palace. Wait. Before Su Buling could speak, the Queen Mother was anxious. If he left, she would have to wait for many days before she could ask Su Buling to come to the palace to reminisce about the past. She would, no, Su Buling would be tortured to death by the dragon locking Gu. Sister, we are all family, there is no need to be so polite. Well, if you want to go back by yourself. I will chat with Linger for a while. The Queen Mother tried to maintain her dignity, like an elder caring for his nephew, and tried hard to find an excuse. Xiao Qi sneered in her heart, picked up the teacup and took a sip. I have been in the palace for less than half an hour. If I hadn't sent the prince back, I would actually like to chat with the Queen Mother more. A trace of grievance flashed in the eyes of the Queen Mother. It seemed that she wanted to ask her sister like when she was a child, but she reacted in an instant, glanced at Su Buling, and didn't know what to say. She thought for a while. In this case, let's eat, Chiao Yi. After a call, Chiao Yi brought the palace maids to bring up the various delicacies that had been prepared long ago and placed them on the table in the side hall. The Queen Mother's banquet couldn't be eaten at the same table, so the 3 seats were still separated. The Queen Mother sat at the small table at the top of the table in a proper manner, secretly glanced at Su Buling, and then raised her glass with a smile. Sister, you came from Huainan, and I haven't welcomed you yet, I offer you a glass. Unfortunately, Xiao Qi got drunk last time and even lost her body, so she naturally didn't want to drink, and shook her head. I don't drink at all, you know, you drink. What do you mean by not drinking at all? You drank last time. Xiao Qi was shocked when she heard this. She and her sister must not know that they had exchanged identities, so she quickly raised her hand. Forget it, I'll drink a little. Then she picked up the wine glass, covered her face with her sleeves, and took a sip. The Queen Mother's expression showed some dissatisfaction, holding the empty wine glass. I've finished drinking, we are all sisters, why are you being so formal? Xiao Qi was a little annoyed, but it was difficult to say anything, so she picked up the wine glass and drank it all. Su Buling, who was sitting opposite, understood the look in the Queen Mother's eyes and raised his glass. Linger is a junior, so I also toast to Miss Xiao. Xiao Qi felt something was wrong. These two wanted to get her drunk together. The Queen Mother saw that Xiao Qi didn't raise her glass and frowned slightly. Sister, Linger toasted, don't lose your status. Xiao Qi frowned slightly, and she must not drink anymore, in case she got drunk again. Thinking of this, Xiao Qi suddenly had an idea, and with a smile, she raised her glass and drank it all again. The Queen Mother saw that there was something going on, and suddenly she returned to her talkative days, holding the glass and talking eloquently, talking about trivial things, toasting every few words, and sending away the palace maids, and closing the doors and windows on the pretext of rain. Miss Xiao, who was only 30 drinks old and could not hold her liquor, had a flushed face. After a short silence, she lay silently on the small table, as if she was drunk. The Queen Mother's eyes lit up slightly, and she raised her hand to tell Su Buling not to speak. After waiting carefully for a moment, she spoke. Sister? Sister? Wu. A faint murmur sounded, and Xiao Qi collapsed on the table, drunk and unconscious. Seeing this, the Queen Mother finally breathed a sigh of relief, and hurriedly stood up, with tears in her eyes. She ran to Su Buling and whispered. Damn boy, are you okay recently? Su Buling stood up, his expression still calm. It's okay, baby. In the huge side hall, the palace maids had been sent away long ago, leaving only Xiao Qi lying on the table. The Queen Mother pursed her lips, her heart was beating fast, but at this moment she regained some rationality, walked to the small couch next to the side hall and sat down, and said coldly. Why didn't you come to the palace earlier? I promised to give you. SHH. Su Buling raised his hand to his mouth, and pointed at Xiao Qi who was lying next to him, signaling the baby not to talk nonsense. The Queen Mother pursed her lips, but she didn't dare to speak too loudly. After thinking for a while, she took out a small mahogany sign from her waist and pointed at the words on it, right, 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 right. There was a flash of annoyance in her eyes, as if she was saying, I'm detoxifying you, why aren't you in a hurry? Su Buling glanced at Xiao Qi for a few times, thought for a while, walked to the Queen Mother and sat down, and said softly. Baby, you've been suffocated in the palace these days, right? The Queen Mother's eyes showed some displeasure, and her expression became serious. Su Buling, I'm giving it to you, oh. Su Buling blocked the Queen Mother's mouth, and regardless of her struggle, he took a big sip. The Queen Mother was still somewhat rational and wanted to maintain her identity and original intention, but the man's breath came over her, and with a strong arm around her waist, her whole body was out of control, and her breathing quickly became rapid. After a little hesitation, she took the initiative to raise her hand to untie Su Buling's belt. Su Buling let go of his lips and grabbed the Queen Mother's hand. The Queen Mother was obviously unable to restrain herself, her face flushed, and she looked at Su Buling, forcing herself to be calm. What's wrong? Su Buling chuckled and tilted his head slightly. Lie down. The Queen Mother's mind was completely confused at this time, biting her lower lip tightly. She should have scolded Su Buling, but in the end she half-heartedly lay on the small couch, then turned over, knelt on it, and whispered. You hurry up, it will be over if you are discovered later. Su Buling chuckled and began to untie his belt. At this time, Miss Xiao, who pretended to be drunk to find out Su Buling's true and false, could no longer pretend. I thought my sister and Su Buling would have some private conversations, but I didn't expect that he would take off his pants and pretend to be able to perform a live spring palace in front of me, so I gently made a woo. In the quiet room, this low murmur was like a thunderclap. The Queen Mother suddenly came to her senses and realized that she had been preparing to detoxify Su Buling here. Her face was as red as fire. She stood up hurriedly and looked away. Su Buling naturally pretended to be frightened and hurriedly arranged his clothes. After Xiao Qi was sure that both of them were ready, she raised her head drunkenly and glanced around. Xiang I'm drunk. The Queen Mother chuckled and hurriedly walked over. Sister, I'll help you go to the side hall to rest. Yes. Xiao Qi pretended to be dizzy, with annoyance and helplessness in her eyes. She never looked at Su Buling and was helped out of the side hall. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 283. The curtain of rain fell on the majestic imperial city. Everything as far as the eye could see was black and gray, and the Tai Chi Hall in the distance could be seen in the distance. Su Buling stood at the window with his hands behind his hands, looking at the palace in the distance, and remained silent for a long time. Tap tap tap. The sound of trotting footsteps came closer and closer, and there were also whispered instructions. You go take care of your sister. I have something to talk to the crown prince about. Just wait outside. I will summon you if something happens. Yes. Turning his head to look, the palace maid bowed to leave. The queen mother walked over at a trot, holding up the hem of her bright red skirt. She had just drank some wine, and her face was still a little flushed. Su Buling smiled and saw no one was around, so he closed the window and opened his arms. The thoughts in the queen mother's mind were obviously very complicated. Ever since she left the palace alone that night and lay on the lawn of Kujiang Pond all night, she discovered something. Without the identity of the queen mother, Su Buling would be the only one left in her world. But she happened to be the queen mother. The explanation of saving Su Buling for the sake of the people of the world can explain what she is doing now, but this excuse also prevents her from losing her identity as the queen mother and forgetting her original intention. The queen mother looked at the embrace, her eyelashes trembled a few times, she paused, raised her hand and closed the door. Don't be presumptuous. I am detoxifying you because I am afraid you will die. If you don't know what to do, just go back and continue to suffer. Baby. While she was speaking, the queen mother noticed the man's breathing in her ears, and a pair of hands wrapped around her waist. The queen mother shook slightly and did not struggle. She just held her skirt tightly and tried to look calm. You can do it yourself, don't waste time. With a smile in his eyes, Su Buring bent over and hugged the princess, picked up the queen mother, walked to the soft couch and sat down. The queen mother always kept her gaze outside, not looking at Su Buling's face. Her embroidered shoes were slightly arched, and her body was trembling slightly because she couldn't control herself. Su Buling has almost finished curing the poison, so naturally he is not in a hurry. Forget your identity today. It will detoxify faster this way. The queen mother lay on Su Buling's arm, pursed her lips and waited for a while. Seeing that Su Buling was still thinking about talking, her eyes finally couldn't help showing a bit of annoyance, and she turned her head. Whether you can detoxify or not, it's up to you if you don't. Detoxification. Su Buling held the queen mother in his arms and smiled, it takes half the night every time. I'm afraid there isn't enough time. Where are the things the baby made? The queen mother stared at her apricot eyes and thought to herself, I am afraid that there is not enough time, and it would not be good to spend most of the day tossing for too long. So he sat up, trotted to the corner of the main hall, took out a small box from behind the big vase, and threw it to Su Buling. Hurry up, otherwise I will be angry and you will suffer on your own. Su Buring smiled and raised his hand to open the box containing the small pouch containing golden quail eggs, foxtail, and honey magnolia paste. The queen mother knew that these things were meant to bully her, but she didn't know the specific purpose. She sat down next to her, pretending to be in conflict, and said calmly, What are these things for? There was obviously some curiosity in his eyes. Su Bulenling smiled kindly, picked up the beautifully crafted foxtail, turned his head, and gave a signal with his eyes. The queen mother took a breath, with indescribable complexity in her eyes. After staring for a moment, she slowly fell down on the soft couch. There is constant wind and rain outside the window, and the daisies brought here in winter are swaying gently in the rain. The raindrops are falling on the green leaves one after another. The flowers, which are like green pheasants, are unable to withstand the ravages of wind and rain. There was a lot of affection in the room, and half an hour later, Su Buling sat back on the soft couch with a bit of a smile. The queen mother, who was in the sage's time, had regained her senses. She was standing far away, her face turned red and purple, her body was shaking uncontrollably, and she was holding a pair of small scissors that she had taken out from nowhere, with tears in her eyes. Woof, as if he had been greatly wronged. Bah, you evildoer, you are just bullying, I. The Queen Mother was so angry that she couldn't speak. She still found it difficult to accept it. After thinking about it, she smashed the scissors. Su Buling raised his hand to catch the scissors and put them on the small case next to him with a serious expression. Detoxification, it's a lot faster this time. Bah you. The Queen Mother's almond-shaped eyes widened. She looked around, then picked up an ornament from the side. She wanted to continue smashing the bastard to death, but refused to listen to her begging for mercy. She was obviously obedient and called Brother Ling, but she still didn't give up. But before she could smash the things out, the Queen Mother saw Su Buling standing up. Her eyes panicked and she hurriedly backed away, still protecting her behind, and said angrily, "You are not allowed to come over, stop, I have called someone. Baby, be good, don't make trouble, let me talk to you about business." "What serious business can you have? I'm going to detoxify you. If you don't detoxify yourself, you'll end up doing ridiculous things." The Queen Mother's voice was very depressed. Su Buling held her hand, and she wanted to struggle. Su Buling forcibly pulled the Queen Mother to sit down next to the soft couch, and said helplessly, "It's really an antidote, just try another method." The Queen Mother held it in for a long time, and finally couldn't help it, and said in a cold voice, "Do you think I'm stupid? That foxtail, bah, you are just bullying me." Su Buling stretched out his wrist, "If you don't believe me, take a look." The Queen Mother's eyes were wary, and she raised her hand to feel the pulse on Su Buling's arm. After feeling it for a while, she found that the locking dragon goo was still there, but her energy and blood were much stronger than before. The Queen Mother was a little confused, her expression became a little calmer, and she frowned slightly. "It's really working, then, how many times will it take to solve it completely?" Su Buling blinked, 40 or 50 times. "Bah no." The Queen Mother hurriedly pulled her hand away, took out a small mahogany sign from her arms, and carefully carved it with a carving knife, Genji. "If you say it 100 times, it means 100 times, just slow down, you, if you dare to mess around again in the future, I will die for you now." Su Buling slightly raised his lips and nodded. "Listen to the baby." The Queen Mother felt a little calmer now. Her face turned red again when she thought about what had just happened, and then she became angrier as she thought about it. She raised her hand and patted Su Buling's arm. "Evil, bastard, white-eyed wolf, all-pervasive, you will not die a good death." Su Buling didn't fight back, thought about it for a moment, and said softly, "When you leave the palace tomorrow, just say that the weather is too hot and you feel depressed, and go to a summer resort to stay for a while." The Queen Mother was stunned, stopped beating people, and tightened her tight phoenix skirt. "Can't you go out of the city to find me? It's a long journey, aren't you tired?" Su Buling shook his head. "Something may happen in Chang'an in a few days. Just wait until a few days later and come back." The Queen Mother frowned slightly, with some doubts in her eyes. "What happened?" Su Buletinling smiled kindly and raised his hand to hold the Queen Mother's cheek. "Baby, be good. You will know when the time comes. No matter what happens, don't go back to Chang'an City. Just stay here." The Queen Mother was not a stupid girl. She felt that something was wrong with her words and her face immediately became serious. "What are you going to do? If you don't tell me clearly, I..." Su Buling sighed, picked up the foxtail from the small case, pushed the Queen Mother down on the soft couch, and started to lift up her skirt. The Queen Mother's eyes suddenly showed a bit of panic, her embroidered shoes kicked up her skirt and swayed, and she said urgently, "Brother Ling, I was wrong, I listened to you." "Good. Su Buletinling let go of his hand and tapped her forehead lightly. Since you trust me to detoxify me, you should know that I won't do anything to make you sorry. Just listen to me and wait and see what happens. I will listen to you in everything from now on. The Queen Mother breathed up and down, pursed her lips, and stared into Su Buring's eyes carefully. Forget it, I trust you. If you dare to lie to me, I will just treat it as a good intention to feed the dog. Anyway, you will die sooner or later. Su Buring chuckled lightly and kissed the Queen Mother on the forehead before standing up and striding away from Changal Palace. Yesterday I coded 9 chapters, and today I have to code 9 more chapters to finish it, so there will be 2 updates. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 284. On the 8th day of May, the scorching sun hung in the sky. The earth is like fire, and the sea is steaming. After days of torrential rain, the blazing sun scorched the earth. Thousands of willows hung down their branches and leaves. The scenery among the thousands of streets was a little distorted in the hot weather. The old dog wandering on the street lay panting in the shadows, saliva dripping in the air. The stone bricks will make a soft sound. The hottest time of the year has arrived in Chang'an City. It was difficult to go out in the weather, but at this time, the road outside the city gate was filled with common people, scholars, and people from all walks of life. They wore bamboo hats and held umbrellas in their hands, heading towards Chui Long Bend on the bank of the Wei River under the blazing flames. A competition to determine the top 10 warriors of Daeyo will be held at Dragon Falling Bend, where it is said that a dragon once fell from the sky and turned into a river. The arena has been set up, and the emperor will also come in person. People in Jianghu are very concerned about face, and there is no greater face than the king of a country coming to observe in person. This can be regarded as a statement to the world's warriors. The imperial court still attaches great importance to warriors. Such a grand event naturally attracted the attention of Daeyo's government and the public. In the Imperial College, there was a day off today, and most of the students went to watch the excitement, and all the school buildings were empty. Thousands of peach trees were exposed to the scorching sun, and a wisp of green smoke rose from the peach blossom forest. Song Yu, who had been imprisoned for 10 years in the Imperial Academy of Painting, stood alone in the peach blossom forest, put a scroll in his hand into a brazier, and looking back at the peach blossoms that had been painted thousands of times, in the flames reduced to ashes. Zioan, I broke my promise back then. Today, I am making amends to you. Lu Yunlin stood beside him and said in a deep voice, Su Buling has been poisoned recently and stayed in the ice room day and night. From the chat with Mrs. Lu's maid, I learned that Su Buling had an extremely bad temper after being poisoned outside the city. Even if Mrs. Lu is not allowed to come close, Su Buletinling will definitely be unable to restrain herself as long as she is able to accompany Mrs. Lu out of the city. Song Yu looked at the burned scroll in the brazier and sighed softly. That's good. Tiger. 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 The land of Sankan is located at the foot of Longtu Mountain in Kinzhou, 600 miles away from Chang'an. Thousands of horses are galloping like the sea, and the royal flag is like burning black flames, ringing in the northwest wind. The wind blows and the drums beat. The military camps of 80,000 Ziliang troops were like countless black bunkers sprouting from the lowest land, stretching to the end of the sky. The soldiers wearing black fish scale armor drew out the 4-foot-long sword from their waists under the scorching sun. 30,000 light cavalry are behind, and 20,000 heavy cavalry are in front. They are all wearing heavy armor and holding long spears. This is the Daeyo Genkuo cavalry that Su Lai spent his whole life saving. It is also the only one in the world that can stand head-on with the northern Qi Iron Rakshasa. Hedging Army. Tu Qinchu, the general of the East Road, stands on the left with 2 hexagonal copper hammers on his shoulders, and Yang Zunyi, the general of the South Road, stands on the right, holding a long black spear. Ujulu held an oil paper umbrella in his hand to protect the white-haired man in python robe and golden crown in front of him from the scorching sun. Tap tap tap. The scout hurried over and handed out the paper tube in his hand. King Su unfolded it and looked at it for a few times, then threw the note down the stage and picked up the long sword from his side. The sword was 3 feet 4 long, with a red flower tassel hanging on it, which was a dowry given by the Lu family of the East China Sea. The name of the sword is Red Lady. Cha! The long sword clattered out of its sheath, and the sword reached the blue sky and the white sun. All troops attack. Promise. Dong dong dong. War drums resounded through the northwest wilderness. The black front crushes the city like a sea of knives, and the sound of thousands of horses galloping is like waves. Chenkang is 300 miles away from Chang'an, and is 30 miles east of Qianyang Pass, the first pass in the northwest. In order to guard against the counterattack of the northern Qi left route army's cavalry, a new pass was built in front of Jiazi, called Zhenhu Pass. The two passes are only 30 miles apart, and there is not a single house or house in the middle area, which is densely covered with countless trenches, bunkers, horses, and pits. The garrison at Qianyang Pass is the Su family army, and the enemy they face are the remnants of the northern Qi dynasty who have firmly occupied Yuanzhou for a generation. After the defeat of Chang'an in Jiazi, the De Qi royal family fled to Mobei and lost the entire Central Plains territory. In order to revive the Central Plains in the future, the northern Qi dynasty kept a tight grip on Yuanzhou, like a horn on the territory, inserting itself into Dao's territory. Among Yuanzhou connects Longnan Liangzhou to the south, Mobei Plain to the north, Guangzhou across the mountains to the east, and the entire Hexi corridor to the west. It is a hub that connects the east and west and the north and the south. Its importance is self-evident. Relying on the dangerous terrain of Liupan Mountain, the northern Qi dynasty built Xiongguan in Jingyuan. The name was directly called Wangnan Pass, and stationed heavy troops to guard it. They clung to this last piece of ground. They all tried to capture the last smelly rock at the door of the house, but unfortunately they were unable to do so due to the terrain. As time went by, the stalemate continued. The enemies faced by Zhenhu Pass on the surface are also the northern Qi soldiers and horses in Yuanzhou, but the actual role of Zhenhu Pass is to guard against King Su in the northwest. After the defeat of Chang'an, Qianyang Pass was garrisoned by the Su family's army. The Su family's contribution to the expansion of the territory was unrewardable, and it was able to frighten the northern Qi dynasty. There was no reason for Su Lai to withdraw his troops. When Emperor Xiaozong died, the Qianyang Pass defenders would not be able to withdraw. The Su family's army's defense against the northern Qi dynasty was naturally impregnable, but if King Su rebelled, it would basically be a flat road all the way to Chang'an City. In order to solve this embarrassing situation, the imperial court built 3 passes between Chenkang and Chang'an during the Jiazi period, followed by Tianwang Pass and Xinping Pass. It was said that they were afraid of a counterattack by the remnants of the northern Qi dynasty. In fact, even the blind knew that they were guarding against King Su. Qianyang Pass was an enclave for King Su. The western army of Dao was stationed in Chenkang. There were 200,000 soldiers in the 3 passes from Chenkang to Chang'an. The leader was Guo Zhongxian, the general of the northern expedition. The soldiers and horses of the Lu family also gathered in it. Under the scorching sun, Lu Chang'an, the eldest son of Taiwei Lu Pingyang, put on his armor and ran quickly to the top of Zhenhu Pass. His face was slightly nervous. When he came under the dragon flag, he raised his hand and said solemnly, "General Guo, King Su has been training troops in Qinzhou recently. It seems to me that something is wrong. General, please don't be careless." Guo Zhongxian was in his 60s. He was able to command Dao's western army and fight against Prince Zhou of the northern Qi dynasty and even Su Yu, Prince Su. He was certainly not an ordinary person. At this time, he pressed the imperial golden sword with his hand, looked at the north, and said coldly. I have been standing here for half my life. When have I ever been so careless that I need a little kid like you to teach me? Guo Zhongxian has always had this temper. Lu Chang'an did not show any dissatisfaction and took a step forward. King Su is training troops in Qinzhou, which is only 300 miles away from Jianyang Pass. If Guo Zhongxian kept his eyes on the north, Su Yu is not a fool. Why did he go to Chang'an for no reason? Even if he breaks through 3 passes and breaks into Chang'an, he can't defend Guanzhong Road with only 200,000 people. His son is also in the capital, crazy. That's when he rebelled. Lu Pingyang pursed his lips, but didn't know much to say. He bowed and said, please don't be careless, General Guo, and strengthen your war preparations. Even if King Su keeps to himself, it can still be regarded as military training, which will have 100 benefits and no harm. Guo Zhongxian thought for a moment and raised his hand. I know, beat the drum. Promise. Dong dong dong. War drums then sounded through the head of Zhenhu Pass. Thousands of miles above the yellow sand, there is a black city where the northern Qi army gathers. Prince Zhou Ruo stood on the top of the city, looking at the huge map in front of him. He placed a small flag at the location of Shazhu and looked towards the direction of Suzhou City, which was facing far away. Chen Xian, you said that there will be changes in Chang'an. It has been a few months. Su Yu has been training troops. Looking at the weather, it is almost time to return to camp. I have transferred half of the troops and horses from the south. In such hot weather, dozens of people died from the heat during the march. If your journey is in vain, I will cut off your head. Chen Xian wore a scholar's robe and stood next to the map, looking at the location of Chang'an. Don't worry, Your Majesty. According to the news from the spies in Chang'an, there will be a competition there today, and Emperor Daiyue will also go there. Judging from his humble position, there will be news soon that will allow the army to break camp. Prince Zhou Ruo looked at the endless military camps behind the Black City and raised his hand. Don't disappoint me, go and deliver the order. Promise. Chen Xian bowed and retreated from the city. At this moment, in Chang'an City, there was still singing and dancing, and there was no movement at all. People in the streets and alleys rushed out of the city with their families to watch the excitement. The wealthy people took advantage of the early morning sun to get on the carriage and go to the Weha River to get a good seat. Only Xiaoting, who had finally defrauded 2 ants of money to make a fortune, was locked in the room, banging on the door and crying. Aunt, I was wrong, please let me out. Tang Jiao will definitely win today's martial arts competition. Please let me take a look and come back after taking a look. It's a pity that no one paid attention to it. Within the majestic imperial city. After the court meeting dispersed, the imperial study room behind Tai Chi Hall was filled with incense. Songji took off the imperial crown of his dragon robe and sat on the couch wearing a civilian robe, leaning on a small case with his elbows. He turned the white pieces over on his fingertips and frowned as he thought about the endgame on the chessboard. Eunuch Jia sat opposite the chessboard with a humble smile on his face. He looked at the sky and reminded softly. Your Majesty, the time for the competition outside the city is coming soon. The ceremonial guards and chariots have been prepared. When will we leave the palace? Songji likes to play chess, and he was scolded by the old man Qi for several years because he delayed his time to go to court by playing chess. At this time, he was stroking the chess pieces, looking a little disappointed. It's time to wrap things up, let me think about it again. Eunuch Jia nodded slightly and sat quietly in front of the chessboard to wait. Songji carefully looked at the endgame in front of him, frowning in thought. It wasn't until 3 o'clock in the morning that he placed the chess piece in his hand on the chessboard. I will leave the palace without any regrets. Promise. After a while. Outside the Taiji Palace, The emperor's chariot with 6 horses riding abreast came out of the palace gate. Songji, crowned in dragon robes, sat on an imperial chariot and walked through Zuk Street. Thousands of people on both sides of the street bowed their heads, and the courtiers and chariots followed closely behind, slowly driving out of Chang'an. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 285. It's midsummer, the riverside is shady with willow trees, and the mountains and fields are ablaze with colors. Dozens of boats are docked by the river, with ladies from official families or literati standing on the decks admiring the scenery along the shore. Chui Long Bay is located on the bank of the Wei River. The rolling water of the river makes a big bend here. Due to the terrain, it is difficult to get direct sunlight. Even in the hot summer, it is extremely refreshing. It has always been a geomantic treasure place for Chang'an people to have fun in the summer. The buildings in the river bend, a large area of buildings was built, collectively called the Huiye Corridor. On the early morning of the 8th day of May, the terraces and pavilions of the Huiye Corridor were already filled with gentry and common people. People from all over the world came to the stage groups, gambling stalls, and brothel singers' boats. Mesa. It was said that the emperor came in person to enjoy the event with the people, but it was impossible for everyone to see it. Even though the honor guard could catch a glimpse of it from a distance when it passed by, most of the people came to join in the fun, just like visiting a temple fair. Today's main event is naturally the battle between Wu and Kuei. In front of the Wangjiang platform in the middle of the river corridor, a huge martial arts stage with a radius of 30 feet has been set up. It is right on the edge of the Wei River, and the scenery is magnificent. Surrounding it is a 1,000-step corridor, with several tables and chairs placed in it, and it is already full of seats. Bead curtains and imperial umbrellas were arranged on the river viewing platform behind the 1,000 steps corridor. The palace maids and eunuchs stood quietly on the river viewing platform waiting. The dragon chair behind the bead curtain was empty, and Emperor Daiyou had not yet arrived. Outside the Wangjiang platform, almost all the wolf guards from the Tianzi camp came out. There were nearly 1,000 black-clad wolf guards with bronze medals hanging on their waists, holding yanling knives in their hands to pay attention to the surrounding disturbances. Further outside, there was the Yulin army led by Gong Sun Ming, who was on guard to prevent the thieves from disturbing the elegance of the emperors and generals in Wangjiangtai. Those who can sit under the river viewing platform and observe together with the king of a country will naturally not be traffickers and pawns. In the middle of the 1,000 steps corridor, Prime Minister Xiao Chuiang, Taiwei Lu Pingyang, and Imperial Censor Kui Huilu were sitting at attention. They were the 3 gongs among the 3 gongs and 9 chengs. Next to them are Grand Sinong Lu Cheng'an and other 9 ministers. Basically all the pillars of Daiyou's court and aristocratic families are here. Among the seats where the princes and nobles are sitting on the right side, in addition to the royal family of the Song family who stayed in the capital, Xiao Qi, the eldest daughter of the Xiao family in Huainan, Tang Jiao of the Tang family in Yuzhou, etc. are also sitting in the back. The seats on the left were occupied by Song Baking, Qi Xinggan, Pei Yulong and other officials and famous figures. Mei Kushan sat next to his teacher Song Baking. In addition to the many dignitaries in the Qianbu corridor, there were also many people standing at the lower level of Wangjiang Terrace. The 9 festival empress, Chen Daoping, Zhang Buxi, Sidu Yueming, Zhang Xiang, all were secretaries who came out of the palace. The leader of the guards or wolf guards is responsible for protecting the safety of the emperor today. To be honest, Tang Xiao, today's protagonist, was a little frightened by such a grand occasion. He sat alone in the corner of the 1,000 steps corridor with his 2 sons, trying to maintain a gentle and elegant attitude, and politely greeted the passing dignitaries. After all, the rivers and lakes are just rivers and lakes, just a small muddy pond. Tang Jiao believed that with his martial arts alone, there was almost no one-match general in the 1,000 steps corridor. However, no matter how high his martial arts skills were in the court, he was just a thug beside the emperor and had no weight at all. Even if he really became one of the top 10 martial arts leaders in the world, he would still have to bow down and salute when he saw a third-grade minister. Not to mention that Tang Jiao was just the head of a martial arts family, so sharing the stage with Xiao Qi was a bit underwhelming. Not to mention Tang Ju and Tang Xuan, they did not dare to sit down and stood honestly behind their father. On the right side, near the center, is the Huan and Xiao family's seat. The eldest daughter, Xiao Qi, is sitting calmly on the chair. She is still wearing a thin black dress, no makeup, holding a teacup in her hand, her eyes fixed on her brother in the distance. Or rather, it was Kui Huailu next to Xiao Chuiang. Kui Huailu is the head of the Kui family in Xiaolu Kui Wangli. He is also the father of the current king and the biological father of Queen Kui Zioan. The Kui family has always been conservative in their behavior. On the surface, they have almost no enmity with anyone, and they have no notable achievements. Even being ranked as the third prince was obtained by virtue of the Jinling Lu family saying something wrong and falling out of favor, and Kui Zioan becoming the queen. But the Kui family can become one of the 5 great families, and they are by no means ordinary people. No one will know what they have done secretly. Xiao Qi has been thinking about Su Buling saying look at the mountains, they are mountains these days, and figured out most of the steps. Therefore, she suddenly became interested in the Kui family, which had always been unknown. She knew that a big wave would be stirred up later. At this time still a little impatient. Behind Xiao Qi, the butler Hua Jingting stood behind him holding a folding fan. He looked around and whispered softly. Miss, if you make the wrong move, Mrs. Xiao, will. Xiao Qi raised her white palm to stop Hua Jingting's words. If you seek wealth through danger, you will end up like the Lu family and be at the bottom among the 3 nobles and 9 ministers. When Hua Jingting saw this, he didn't say anything more. He looked back at the Wangjiang terrace directly behind him, and then withdrew his gaze. The Holy One has arrived. After waiting for a long time, a drake's voice echoed through the Wangjiang platform, kicking off the recent competition. The 3 princes, 9 ministers, princes, generals, and ministers all stood up, looked at each other on the river platform and bowed their heads. On the Wangjiang platform, where you can have a bird's-eye view of the river corridor, Emperor Daiyou in dragon robe showed his figure, walked slowly and leisurely, and sat on the dragon chair. Behind the dragon chair, there is a tall figure with 3 straight knives lying across the side. His face is covered with black cloth and standing in the darkness behind the bead curtain. It is not clear, but some people with experience can guess that this is the one in the dark of the detective department. Old Yi. There is another figure next to Lao Yi, also standing in the darkness behind the dragon chair, holding an iron gun motionless. He should be the emperor's dead soldier B. It is naturally impossible for everyone to know how many dead soldiers there are around the emperor to protect his safety. However, with Eunuch Jia and Eunuch Jia present, all A, B, and C were present, plus thousands of wolf guards and imperial guards, safety was sufficiently guaranteed. At this time, Eunuch Jia was standing outside the bead curtain, holding a whisk in his hand and looking down, saying the emperor's words. I love you, no courtesy. Our dynasty was founded by martial arts, and the practice of martial arts is prevalent among the people. The Wangjiang terrace was very large, with nearly 1,000 people gathered below including courtiers, princes, celebrities, family members, etc., as well as countless wolf guards and imperial guards to ensure safety. Eunuch Jia's voice came clearly to everyone's ears. It was all a conversation, and everyone in the Qianbu corridor sat down and listened quietly. Tang Jiao took a sip of tea to suppress the turmoil in his heart, took the sword from his son, and prepared to go on stage to show off his skills and win a few compliments from the emperor. Sidu Yueming was also a little nervous. After all, the outcome in the ring was unpredictable. If he won, the Sidu family would be the one martial leader with 2 martial arts. It didn't matter whether he could get it or not, and then get it. Why not if the court gave him a chance? At this time, he was gearing up and took the 9-ring sword from Siduhuiu. His nephew Siduhuiu kept encouraging his uncle. However, after Eunuchio finished speaking, he did not let the two of them take the stage. Instead, he looked at Meikushin, who had lowered his hair. When warriors fight, victory or defeat can only be determined by a thought. When Tang Jiao takes the stage, 3 moves can determine the outcome. Many spectators have come all the way, so it would be unsatisfactory to go back like this. Back then, in front of Prince Mei's palace, one sword moved Chang'an. The Holy One still often mentions that since Mr. Mei is here, why not go on stage to show off, which can open the eyes of many young disciples. When everyone sitting there heard this, they all nodded and smiled in agreement. After all, there was really no suspense about the fight between Tang Jiao and Sidu Yueming, so it would be better to let the young disciples of each family show off in front of the emperor. When Meikushin heard this, he naturally couldn't displease the emperor. He immediately stood up and bowed, then jumped directly onto Nyoda's martial arts stage. He was dressed in a scholar's robe, carrying a green-edged sword, and looked into the distance. Tang Jiao. In this case, this junior will be offended. Tang Jiao's face froze. As the saying goes, fists are afraid of young people. He couldn't afford to lose again today. How could he possibly have a fight with his predecessor, King Kui Meiku? Even if he wins, it will be a tragic victory. How can he fight against the 28-way serial sword later? Many onlookers had strange expressions on their faces. They all looked at Tang Jiao with a look that said, "Please die for the head of the Tang family. Aren't you competing? There is no second place in the martial arts. Even a junior dare not accept the move. How can he be a military leader?" Fortunately, the original intention of today's competition was to set an example, not to embarrass the Tang family who were loyal to the court. Eunuchia stood on the high platform and said with a smile, "Mr. Mei is still young. It's too early to ask the Tang family for swordsmanship. Just compete with his peers, and it can be regarded as entertaining the Holy Emperor and many onlookers." To be honest, Meikushin was a little disappointed to miss out on the 10 martial leaders. However, it was also a great honor to be selected by the Holy One to perform. He immediately raised his sword and looked at the younger generation sitting there. It is not common to have the opportunity to show off one's art skills in front of the emperor, against Meikushin, and there is no shame in losing. At present, the generals and young masters of various families are gearing up and rushing to take the stage. And this storm finally started to blow. It has a total of 40,000 words and is being refined. Please get up tomorrow morning and read it again. I will try to finish it tonight. Please give me some monthly tickets at the beginning of the month, thank you. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 286. Good. It is worthy of being called One Sword Moves Chang'an. The arena under the Wangjiang Terrace was full of swords and sabers, and exclamations were heard in the corridor. The princes and generals all focused their attention on Meikushin and many young men, and did not notice the commotion that had just occurred outside. The 3 dukes, 9 ministers, and 12 high officials of the court sat in the middle like tumblers, and occasionally commented and talked a few words. The famous scholars on the left racked their brains to see if they could leave a masterpiece that would be passed down through the ages. Pei Yulong even spread out the painting table and prepared to paint a picture of the emperor looking at the river. On the Wangjiang Terrace, Eunuch Xia, wearing a bright red robe, stood close to the emperor and occasionally commented a few words, while the 2 secret guards behind him remained silent. As the atmosphere on the stage became more and more heated, everyone was concentrating on watching. Lu Yunlin, the deputy envoy of the investigation department, who was in charge of security with Zhang Xiang, poked his head out from the stairs and raised his hand to salute. Eunuch Jia, General Han brought his 2 grandsons here today. I would like to ask Eunuch Jia to take a look at the 2 grandsons' muscles and bones. I wanted to bring the 2 grandsons up, but there are many court officials present, so it's a bit inappropriate to do such a small thing. Although Eunuch Jia has stayed in the palace all his life, his reputation has long been spread far and wide, and everyone in the court and the country knows it. With such a big old immortal in the palace, naturally many princes and nobles brought their sons and grandsons to ask Eunuch Jia to read their faces and touch their bones to see if they can also produce descendants with dragon tendons, tiger bones, and unicorn strength. It's just that Eunuch Jia has been with the emperor all year round. Even if he is the prime minister, it is impossible for him to go to bother the emperor for such a small matter. There are few opportunities to leave the palace like this. Hans Hongyu is a military officer second only to the general in the court. He is also a high-ranking official. It's not surprising that he took the opportunity to come and ask. Eunuch Jia was standing by the stairs of the high platform holding a gong hammer. When he heard this, he looked at Song Ji, who was watching the fight seriously. Song Ji had been looking at the ring, but he also heard Lu Yunlin's words. It was just a small matter, so he casually said, "Go." Yes. Eunuch Jia bowed slightly, handed the gong hammer to a eunuch beside him, and followed Lu Yunlin down the Wangjiang terrace to a house under the stage. The Han family members who were eagerly waiting, with 2 little boys of 3 or 4 years old, hurriedly welcomed Eunuch Jia in. Ding. After a while, the emperor seemed to be tired of Mei Kushan beating the children, so he raised his hand. The eunuch struck the gong, and the warm-up of the ring to liven up the atmosphere was over. Under the attention of the crowd, Tang Xiao and Sidu Yueming boarded the ring. Just now, Mei Kushan's single-handed sword fight against the heroes had already livened up the atmosphere. Now the main show was here, and the atmosphere was also pulled up. Many people who like to do good things also suggested that Sidu Yueming go down and let Tang Jiao and Mei Kushan fight. In such a lively atmosphere, Song Ji on the Wangjiang terrace seemed to be interested. He asked the palace maid to open the sunshade bead curtain, stood by the fence of the Wangjiang terrace with his hands behind his back, and looked at the ring below. Tang Jiao has been in the martial arts world for a lifetime and is considered a person of transcendent status. However, seeing that the court prepared such a grand ceremony for him, even the emperor showed up and stood on the Wangjiang terrace to watch. He was naturally terrified and more serious, standing with a sword in his hand, showing the demeanor of a master. Sidu Yueming is a world apart from his brother. He can only be regarded as a first-class master in the martial arts world. He has not yet touched the threshold of the Grand Master. He knows that he is not Tang Jiao's opponent. But the Sidu family has always been a hegemonic family. Naturally, they will not be afraid in front of thousands of people, and they are still eager to try. Clang. Another sound fell, announcing the start of today's battle for the world's 10 martial arts champions. The whole place fell silent, staring at the ring intently, fearing that the fight would be over in the blink of an eye. Tang Jiao was also concentrating, raising the sword inlaid with pearls and jade in his hand, and said loudly, "Yuzhu Tang family, Tang Jiao. Dog Emperor." Before Tang Jiao finished speaking, a sudden angry rebuke resounded like thunder under the Wangjiang stage. The whole place was silent, with some confusion in the astonishment. Tang Jiao shuddered and was almost scared to death. Sidu Yueming was also shocked. He thought that the Tang family was cheating to distract him, but after thinking carefully, the Tang family might be desperate to distract him in this way, so he turned his head and looked at the stage. Nearly 1,000 people under the Wangjiang stage were startled by this voice mixed with boundless anger, and all looked at the entrance of the Wangjiang stage. At the end of the Qianbu corridor, at the gate heavily guarded by the wolf guards and the imperial guards, a young man in a white robe and holding a long sword strode in. His cheeks, which were originally as handsome as jade, were now livid and twisted, his forehead was bulging with blue veins, and his whole body exuded boundless murderous and violent aura. Gong Sun Ming of the Tianziying Wolf Guards and the Imperial Guards heard the Dog Emperor and did not dare to step forward to stop him. Instead, he was stunned on the spot, not knowing what to do. If it were ordinary children and ordinary people, they would not hesitate to say this and be killed on the spot. But the murderous young man in front of him was the young master of the 200,000 Ziliang army and the only son of a king of a different surname in Dayu. Without the emperor's order, how could they dare to draw their swords to stop him? It was this moment of hesitation that Su Buling had already passed through the gate, strode under the Qianbu corridor, and walked straight to the Wangjiang terrace. The 3 dukes, 9 ministers, and even the Song royal family were all shocked and stunned. They didn't understand why Su Buling suddenly became so presumptuous. This sentence was truly a deception of the emperor. Even if he relied on the protection of Prince Su to survive, he could not escape the punishment of house arrest until death. Is Su Buling crazy? In the corridor, Xiao Qi looked at the man who was so gentle and elegant a few days ago. He was also shocked. His face was purple, obviously the dragon-locking poison had taken effect. What was he going to do? Presumptuous. You are bold. Su Buletinling, you are crazy. After a brief silence, the courtiers who reacted became furious, stood up and shouted hurriedly. Songji, who was on the Wangjiang stage, frowned and seemed to be stunned and did not speak. The Wolf Guard and the Royal Forest Army came to their senses at this time, and chased after him with their swords in hand, trying to hold down the mad Prince Su. It's a pity that Su Buling seemed to be walking at a long pace, but his speed was surprisingly fast. He had covered more than half the distance in the blink of an eye, his eyes were blood red, and his voice with boundless anger reached everyone's ears. My Su family is full of loyal people, and I have never been ashamed of the Song family or the people of the world. Before the Jiazi period, my grandfather Su Lai joined the army as a butcher and spent his whole life to secure thousands of miles of territory for the Song family. Success is not about wealth and honor, so he goes abroad with his own soldiers and expands his territory in the wild northwest to the western regions. I am still guarding the gate of the country for you Songji in the thousands of miles of yellow sand. Has there ever been a day when I said a word of disloyalty to you Songji? The angry questioning was deafening. All the courtiers in the corridor stood up and said anxiously. No, you are so presumptuous. Shut up, are you crazy? 10 years ago, the Donghai Lu family disobeyed the imperial court's orders. You, Songji, gave an order. My father, King Suyu, personally led his cavalry into the Donghai Lu family, and beheaded the head of the Lu family for you. That is my mother's biological father, my grandfather, and my father-in-law. Doesn't killing relatives in such a righteous way not prove the loyalty of my Su family? Presumptuous. The 3 princes and 9 ministers were all frightened, and the Song royal family was also furious. Even if they were telling the truth, how could they use such a tone to question the emperor? Su Buletinling, you are crazy. Kneel down quickly. Your Majesty, calm down. On the Wangjiang platform, Songji stood with his hands behind his hands, as if he hadn't yet reacted. Su Buling stood under the Wangjiang tower, pulled out his long sword, looked at the excited civil and military officials, and pointed at the emperor above. My Su family has never been disloyal for a moment. Just because I have made great contributions, you, Songji, are jealous. You want to destroy all my Su family. I am not as good as the forest, so you put a dragon poison on me. What are you afraid of? My Su family is rebelling. Are you afraid that I will break the law with force? The angry scolding shocked all the princes and generals in the room. Everyone was in disbelief. They didn't expect Su Buring to say this. Although they had suspected that the dragon-locking goo was planted by the emperor, there was no evidence for this matter, and it was obviously not something they could put on the table. After saying this, even if the Su family is really loyal, they should be feared by the emperor. Does Su not want to exterminate the family? Put your sword down. It's nonsense, how could your majesty? Su Buletinling, don't talk nonsense. Put down the sword, your Su family will fail if you want to rebel. The scoldings continued, but this time they were all a little frightened, and his eyes moved to Songji above. Songji frowned and just looked at Su Buling, still maintaining his kingly demeanor. Su Buling's handsome face was almost twisted, and he raised his sword and pointed it at Songji. The emperor is unruly, wants to slaughter meritorious deeds, and does things like rabbits to death and dogs to be cooked. He is not worthy of being a king. He should be replaced. 3 generations of my Su family have been loyal, but I can die on the battlefield in the enemy's country, but I cannot die at the hands of rats. Since you, Songji, want my Su family to be exterminated, you must change the world to a wise master before exterminating the family. Die. Click. After a loud roar, the stone bricks under the Wangjiang platform shattered. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 287. Su Buling held a 3-foot-high sword, his figure turned into white thunder, and rushed directly to the 3-foot-high platform, with the sword blade pointing directly at Songji. How dare you? Protect the emperor! Cries of surprise rose up. Under the Wangjiang platform, dozens of secret guards immediately took action, and rushed towards Su Buling who had dared to offend. In an instant, the sound of clothes and weapons breaking the wind rose up, and dozens of figures flew up, almost blocking the scorching sun in the sky. The ministers and princes and sons of the royal family were in chaos, and many of them were so scared that they collapsed on the ground. The 3 dukes and 9 ministers who still maintained some rationality hurriedly shouted, "Leave someone alive!" But the next moment, everyone was stunned. I saw the sword energy rising to the sky under the Wangjiang platform, and a white shadow rushed through the dozens of secret guards like a strong dragon entering the sea. Swish, swish, swish. The sword blade danced quickly, blood and limbs flew, and fell on the stone bricks like raindrops. Wherever the sword light passed, there was almost no intact body falling from the air. Until he rushed to the bottom of the high platform, Su Buling's white clothes were still not stained with blood. This. Tang Xiao, standing on the ring, was shocked. Looking at the young man with bloodless clothes, he suddenly recalled the sword saint Zhu Zhoushan who suppressed a generation of people in the martial arts world with a sword. No. Zhu Zhoushan was not so cruel back then. This is not a human. Come here. Protect the emperor. Ah! Amid the chaos and screams, the secret guards advanced and retreated in a mess. The 9-sectioned lady held the 9-sectioned whip but did not dare to rush up. Instead, she raised her head and shouted angrily. Protect the emperor, where is eunuch Xia? He is fighting for his life, stop him quickly. Come on. Su Buling held a long sword in his hand and killed more than 10 people without getting blood on his clothes. Under the effect of the dragon locking goo, his forehead and arms were blue and purple, and his blood vessels bulged like earthworms. His eyes were like those of a ghost in the underworld. Who can stop me? Stop him. Quick. The civil and military officials sitting around, who knew some martial arts, rushed up quickly, but did not dare to really go forward. On the high platform, the death warriors B and C stood in front of the emperor with weapons, their eyes cold. Ah! Su Buling's feet slammed on the ground and jumped to the middle of the high platform. He raised his hand and clawed directly into the wall of the high platform. He used the force to pull his body up suddenly and jumped directly onto the fence of the Wangjiang terrace. Protect the emperor. Ah! Screams were heard everywhere. At the same time, 2 of the 3 straight knives behind Lao Yi were unsheathed, and his tall figure rushed out like a battering ram, directly breaking through the fence. The sharp blades were like silver lines, slashing at Su Buling, who had just rushed over the fence. Ding 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 ding. In an instant, dozens of sparks bloomed on the high platform. The people below couldn't see the movements clearly at all. They only saw that one of Lao Yi's straight knives was broken, and the one behind him had not yet been unsheathed, but a bloody wound appeared on his chest, and the whole person fell from the high platform. Wow! The noisy sound could no longer be distinguished. Many wolf guards climbed up to the high platform, and they were all stunned on the spot. They didn't expect that Lao Yi, whose martial arts were second only to AncientChina, would lie down so quickly. It's a pity that the situation didn't allow people to think. The dead soldier C, holding a black spear, rushed towards Su Buling, closely following Lao Yi. Su Buling had been forced to the edge of the platform by Lao Yi. The gun of the death soldier C was like a dragon, and he stabbed 12 times in an instant, forcing Su Buling to retreat one step. This step was in mid-air. Ah! The death soldier C took this opportunity to smash Su Buling's body with the long gun in his hand, trying to knock Su Buling off the platform. Bang! The long gun was smashed out, but was caught by Su Buling with one hand. Su Buling's feet were in the air, and he fell naturally. Coupled with the powerful gun, the whole person was knocked off the platform. But before going down, Su Buling did not let go of the gun, but pulled hard, forcibly pulling the gun of the death soldier C down from the edge of the platform. The death soldier C reacted very quickly and immediately dropped the gun, and punched Su Buling's chest with both fists in mid-air. But what no one expected was that Su Buling was really crazy, crazy to the point of fearlessness. The two punches of the assassin C hit him in the chest. Su Buling didn't dodge or close his eyes. He ignored the assassin C in front of him and threw the sword in his hand. Shua! The sharp sound of the sword resounded throughout the venue. The 3-foot-long sword was like being shot out by a crossbow, and it came to Song Ji, who was watching coldly with the terrifying sound of breaking the wind. Hua Jingting and Mei Kushan, who had just rushed to the high platform to rescue him, were all terrified. They rushed forward to block the long sword, but it was too late. Shua! The sword flashed, and blood splashed 5 steps. Everyone froze suddenly. The huge Wang Jiangtai was silent in an instant, as if the whole world was frozen at this moment. The blood-stained longsword was nailed on the eaves of the high platform, and a few drops of blood dripped from the blade and hit the floor tiles. The Emperor of Daewoo, wearing a dragon robe, looked down at the bloody hole that had pierced his heart, his eyes showing a bit of confusion, and then blood went into his lungs. He coughed out a mouthful of blood, and fell backwards. Plop! The sound of the light fall to the ground was not loud, but it woke everyone up. Your Majesty! Your Majesty! Ah! Wailing and screaming were heard everywhere, and countless wolf guards and imperial guards rushed to the platform like crazy. Civil and military officials stood stiffly on the spot, their bodies trembling, as if they had not yet reacted to the current situation. AncientChina ran out of a nearby house and shouted angrily, "Bold!" but it was too late. After jumping up to the high platform, he hugged Song Ji, who kept coughing up blood, and rushed to where the imperial doctor was. Place. It's a pity that a sword pierced the heart. Everyone looked at the blood-stained sword stuck on the cornice and slowly collapsed on the ground, gradually realizing the current situation. Regicide. The Su family actually committed regicide. Su Buletinling actually dared to kill the king in public. What a heinous crime this is. Thump. There was a muffled sound of falling to the ground again. Below the high platform, Su Buling, who had so far been wearing a white robe without any blood, finally ran out of oil, spit out a mouthful of black blood, and fell to the ground. His face was twisted and livid, but he let out a laugh like a nine-ghost ghost. Ha 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 ha. The smile was sad and crazy, mixed with the sound of coughing with blood foam, which made people shudder. Many courtiers were confused and stood there without knowing what to do. Lu Pingyang, one of the three princes, was the first to react. He rushed to the fence and shouted angrily. "Come here, capture this traitor." Many of the wolf guards and imperial guards turned pale, and hurriedly rushed toward Su Buling, who had just committed the crime of regicide, and surrounded him. Xiao Chuang seemed to have just reacted at this time. His face became furious. He pushed Lu Pingyang away and said angrily, "The bold thief will be killed without mercy." The wolf guard immediately rushed forward with a knife, roaring, and chopped the regicide rebel into pieces. Tai Wei Lu Pingyang was stunned for a moment, then a look of horror appeared on his face, and he quickly raised his hand to stop. "Can't kill, can't kill." Kui Huilu, the imperial censor, also looked anxious and quickly raised his hand to scold. "Don't kill. You can't kill." The wolf guard stopped again, holding the knife and not knowing what to do. The three princes and 9 ministers had different opinions, so they naturally did not dare to kill King Su's son without permission. When Xiao Chuang saw this, his face became furious. He raised his hand and slapped the two of them on the face, and asked angrily, "It is a serious crime to deceive the king and commit regicide. Why can't he be killed? You also want to rebel, can't you?" Lu Pingyang was slapped, but he didn't dare to fight back and said anxiously, "You can't kill him. Once he kills King Su, he will rebel, and Chang'an will be finished." Kui Huilu also looked anxious and said, "King Su is training troops in Qinzhou. If he learns that his son is dead, he will definitely rebel. Once a fight breaks out, the world will be in chaos. You can't kill him." Xiao Chuang raised his hand and slapped him again. "So what if King Su rebelled? The Holy Emperor was killed by this thief. Do you still want to take him back?" Kui Huilu was speechless and his face turned red. Lu Pingyang was so angry that he knelt down directly. "Xiao Xiang, please calm down. This is a matter of concern for the people of the world. If you kill someone, you can't save him. Let's take down this traitor first and then make a decision after returning to Chang'an." Xiao Chuang was furious. Looking at the bewildered civil and military officials, he turned and walked outside Wangjiang Terrace. "Return to Chang'an quickly, be sure to protect the life of the Holy One, send a message to the 3 kings of Chu, Shu, and Henan, and immediately lead the army to King Qin in Beijing." Lu Pingyang breathed a sigh of relief, stood up hurriedly, asked the wolf guards to lock Su Buling, who was still laughing crazily, and followed Xiao Chuang back to Chang'an City. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 288. Report. Inside the Imperial College, an anxious shout resounded outside the peach blossom forest. Song Yu, who had been pacing back and forth beside the brazier for a long time, hurried to the gate and said in a deep voice, "Why are you shouting so loudly? What happened?" Outside the gate, Lu Pinjiang's son Lu Changrun, with uncontrollable excitement in his eyes, looked around and said anxiously, "The big thing has been done. Su Buling really fell into the trap." In a rage, he rushed to the Wangjiangtai and committed the crime of regicide. Song Yu's whole body shook slightly, and it was still a little unbelievable. "It worked in one go. How is my brother?" Lu Changrun gasped, trembling with excitement. "I saw it with my own eyes. A sword pierced through the heart and passed through the body. Lu Yunlin was guarding around the imperial chariot. According to his report, the emperor had died as soon as he left the Wangjiangtai. The country cannot be without a monarch for a day. Now the officials are leaderless and no one is sitting in the court. The prince is still. Please go to Taiji Palace as soon as possible to take charge of the situation." Song Yu's body shook twice, touched his chest, with a bit of disbelief in his eyes. "Brother, just died like this?" Lu Changrun raised his hand to hold Song Yu's arm, and said anxiously, "It is absolutely true, there is no mistake. Now Su Buling will definitely die for regicide." Prince Su will definitely lead his army out of Qinzhou to put pressure on the court. The two kings of Shu and Chu will not be able to rush to the capital in time, and the officials can't wait. Please go to Taiji Palace as soon as possible. Song Yu was in a trance for a moment, and then his face was slightly shocked. He rushed out of the Imperial College and went to Taiji Palace in the Imperial City. In the Meiji Mountain area outside the Qinzhou border, 2,000 court soldiers were stationed here. Because Qianyang Pass was guarded by the Ziliang army behind, the troops stationed in Meiji Mountain were only symbolic and had no practical effect. At noon, 5 scouts sat on a beacon tower left over from the previous dynasty on the top of the mountain, chewing dry food with water bags in their hands. Among the scouts, there was an old soldier, also a sergeant, who was sitting in the shade under the beacon tower, telling some dirty jokes collected over the years in a vivid and colorful manner. The 4 scouts were all newly recruited recruits, only 17 or 18 years old. Otherwise, they would not have been sent to Meiji Mountain, where there had been no war for 60 years, to train. This place was sandwiched between the Daeyo Western Army and the Ziliang Iron Cavalry. Unless the Ziliang Army left Qinzhou or the court attacked King Su one day, it would be possible to light a beacon. Military orders are like mountains. Since the court kept this beacon tower, it naturally still has a use. The old sergeant had been here for a lifetime, and he even remembered how many trees there were in the poplar forest under the beacon tower. He had lost interest long ago, and just let a silly new recruit stand under the sun and look at it. Dong dong dong. Just as the old sergeant was telling dirty words in a vivid and colorful manner, circles of ripples suddenly appeared in the water bowl in his hand. The soldier who was chewing dry food nearby looked at him and sneered, "Sergeant, why are your hands shaking? Did you do that last night? Bah, believe it or not, I'll deflower you tonight, my hands can't shake." The old sergeant spat, looked at the water bowl in his hand, and was a little confused. After thinking for a while, he put the water bowl on the ground and lay down to listen. Horse hooves, quite a lot. The new soldier also listened, but unfortunately he couldn't hear anything, and wondered. "We are infantrymen, where did the horse hooves come from?" The old sergeant frowned and thought for a while, then raised his head. "Hey, idiot, did you see anything?" The scout on the high side of the beacon tower raised his hand and pointed to the northwest. "There's a lot of smoke." "Smoke?" The old sergeant was puzzled, stood up, patted his butt, and glanced out of the window. Who would have thought that this glance would be so creepy? At the end of the wilderness northwest of Meiji Mountain, a black line with no visible edge appeared. The dust raised by tens of thousands of soldiers and horses covered the sky, like a tsunami that had just appeared, slowly pressing down from the horizon. This. The old sergeant's pupils shrank slightly, his face turned pale, and he turned and crawled towards the torch, cursing. "You fool, why didn't you say it earlier? Fire, quick, where is the fire?" Several new soldiers were still at a loss, and they got up and found the fire starter and handed it to the old sergeant. "What's wrong, what is that?" The old sergeant's face was pale, and he crawled up to the beacon tower, kicked the fool away, stood next to the pile of dry firewood and horse manure, held the torch and looked to the northwest, his legs shaking uncontrollably. The northwest of Meiji Mountain is the border of Qinzhou, where there is a poplar forest, and beyond the poplar forest is the territory of King Su. Although the troops of the Prince of Su can be stationed at Qianyang Pass, this place is a no-man's land, and it's okay for the people to run between the two sides, but since ancient times, the court has had an iron rule that if the princes leave their fiefdoms without the order of the court, they will be regarded as treason. Qianyang Pass is changed every 3 years, and it is not time to change the guard now, and there are too many troops in front, enough to attack Chang'an. The old sergeant knew that the Prince of Su was training in Qinzhou, but he shouldn't train in this place, because if he goes further, he will be out of Qinzhou. Under the scorching sun, Beads of sweat fell on the scorched stone slabs. The old sergeant's hand holding the torch trembled slightly, his eyes stared at the black line, and he didn't even dare to blink. The Prince of Su crossed the small poplar forest, and if the fire didn't start, he would lose his head. But if this fire really started, it would not burn a pile of firewood, but the lives of hundreds of thousands of soldiers who had lived in peace for 60 years on both sides. Tiger! 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 Gradually, the deafening roar came from the sky, more and more, until the whole world was left with only this one sound. The dust and smoke raised by the 80,000-man army swept across the land, covering the sky and the sun. The black royal flag fluttered in the wind, like a series of death warrants. The old sergeant even stopped breathing, still staring at the forest, and forced himself not to throw the torch down. Several soldiers were so scared that their faces turned pale and fell to the ground. They first grabbed the weapons leaning against the wall, then dropped their weapons and ran down the beacon tower in a panic. Tiger! 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 Tens of thousands of people shouted in unison, as if they were right in front of them. Tens of thousands of blades were like waves, flashing a cold light that could crush people and things in the world under the scorching sun. The horses' hooves stomped heavily on the ground, breaking several earthenware jars placed in the beacon tower into pieces. The old sergeant was like a wooden man, holding a torch and standing alone on the beacon tower, watching the black ocean slowly approaching the poplar forest, getting closer and closer, and finally... boom! The blazing flames rose from the beacon tower, and the billowing smoke rushed straight into the sky. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The old sergeant picked up his long knife from the ground like a madman and rushed to the military camp at the foot of the mountain. His shrill rebukes spread far and wide throughout the Meiji mountain. Unfortunately, the military camp stationed at the foot of the mountain had already fled in all directions, leaving only a large area of barracks and the dragon flag still fluttering in the wind. At the same time, at the end of the thousands of miles of yellow sand far away in the sky, the dark northern Qi army appeared at the edge of the Sand Sea. In front of them was Guazhou, the westernmost territory of Daewoo. After passing through Yumen Pass in Guazhou, it was the western regions. The general riding on a warhorse, looking at the city in the distance, raised his hand to catch an eagle falling straight from the sky. A paper tube was tied to the eagle's leg, with the mark of the left Prince Zhang-ni on it. The general let the eagle go, opened the paper tube and took a look, then pulled out a scimitar from the side of his horse and pointed it at the city. Beat the drum. Bang, bang, bang. Kill. The overwhelming shouting and killing voices instantly drowned out the entire sea of sand. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 289. It was already night, and Chang'an City fell into dead silence. There was a curfew in all the streets and all the neighborhoods. No one could be seen. Everyone hid in their houses, observing the situation outside through the cracks in the doors. Even the illiterate people understood what happened on the Wangjiang terrace. Not to mention killing the emperor, even if it was just assassinating the emperor, it was a serious crime punishable by the death of 9 generations of the family. But the person who killed the emperor was the son of Prince Su. Prince Su is still famous in the 3 kingdoms and is talked about by the people. He is the first meritorious official who helped Daewoo conquer thousands of miles of territory. The 200,000 Ziliang troops are the face of Daewoo and the most capable army of Daewoo. Until now, the northern Qi has used half of its troops to defend against Prince Su and the other half to defend against the other troops of Daewoo. If Prince Su rebelled, he would definitely not be able to become emperor, because once the imperial troops and the other 6 Song princes' troops arrived, the 200,000 people in Ziliang alone could not defend Guanzhong Road. But if the Prince Su rebels, Can he enter Chang'an City? The first thought of the people in Chang'an City is, yes. If the Su family army, which once swept the world, could not even take down 3 passes and Chang'an, it would not be called the Su family army. The son of the Prince Su killed the emperor, and he deserved to die. But if the son of the Prince Su was killed, the son and the princess of the Prince Su would all die. Everyone knows what a lonely man can do. Loyalty and bravery are also limited. If the Prince Su rebels, millions of soldiers and civilians in Guanzhong Road will perish with the Prince Su. The Prince Su dared to do this, but the court did not dare. But even if the Prince Su did not rebel, the crime of regicide, if the Prince Su's son was not killed and the vassal was not reduced, where would the majesty of the court be? Fortunately, the people of Chang'an City do not need to consider this problem, nor are they qualified to consider it. The only people who can deal with this problem are the civil and military officials standing in the Taiji Hall. But this problem is obviously not easy to solve. The lights in the imperial city were bright. It was time to close the palace gates, but the civil and military officials in the court were still arguing like headless flies in the Golden Palace. Since returning from outside the city, the officials have hardly had time to drink a sip of water. They are anxious to discuss a countermeasure to deal with Prince Su. In fact, this matter is simple to sort out. Prince Su killed the emperor, and the entire Su family should be executed. But who dares to give this order? How to let Prince Suyu come to the capital to die? If Suyu can't come to the capital to die, then we can only send troops to fight. Once the troops are sent, Prince Su will rebel even if he doesn't want to. If Prince Su rebels, the peace of 60 years will be destroyed. No one can predict what will happen in the end. If we only kill Su Buling and don't blame Prince Su may still rebel. And who dares to speak up if Su Buling is not killed? The emperor has been killed, and he still swallows his anger and doesn't kill Su Buling. What's the use of the court? In the final analysis, this is a question of whether to fight or not. Even the 3 dukes and 9 ministers dare not make a conclusion on this issue, nor are they qualified to make a conclusion. In this way, everyone held their own opinions. After arguing until the evening, the Taiji Golden Hall finally reached a consensus: find someone who can take charge first. The Golden Hall was crowded with people. All the princes who usually did not attend the court came, as well as the old people of the royal family. After the voices gradually subsided, Taiwei Lu Pingyang finally stood up and said loudly, "Everyone, the country cannot be without a king for a day. If the argument continues, the 6 princes will arrive in Chang'an, and it will be clear what the scene will be. The emperor has not appointed a crown prince. Now the most urgent task is to appoint a wise king to announce it to the world, so as to prevent the whole world from falling into a sea of fire and smoke." As soon as these words came out, the civil and military officials in the court quieted down, and only then realized that the current situation was not good. Let's not talk about the question of whether Prince Su rebelled or not. Songji had no queen and eldest son, so he had never appointed a crown prince. If the throne was still empty before the 6 princes arrived in the capital, then the court officials would have no say. The 6 Song princes were all qualified to inherit the throne. Basically, whoever arrived in the capital first would be the emperor, and it would be legitimate. Under this premise, the 6 princes would definitely rush to Chang'an without stopping, and it is possible that the Wei and Chu princes, who were closest to Chang'an, would fight on the way before the Su prince arrived in Chang'an. It is also possible that the 6 princes would not move, waiting for the Su prince to break Chang'an, kill the previous emperor's lineage, and then the 6 dragons would fight for the throne. In order to fight for the throne, it is natural that any incredible situation will occur. Compared with the throne, the chaos in the world is not worth mentioning. Anyway, the throne belongs to the Song family. Without the monarch's edict, why should the 6 princes listen to the transfer of a group of court officials with different surnames? Upon noticing this situation, the civil and military officials in the court became anxious. It didn't matter whether the Su prince would rebel or not. Before the news came out, they had to stabilize the 6 Song princes. As long as there is an emperor in Chang'an City, the 6 princes dare not come to seize the throne legitimately, otherwise they will not be able to sit still if they are not legitimate. It is better to rebel against one prince than to rebel against the 6 princes together. For a while, the Taiji hall became quiet. The officials looked around and gradually locked their eyes on the Yan Wang Songyu, who was standing in the corner of the palace with a sad face and tears. To choose a monarch, he must be surnamed Song, because Songji did not establish a crown prince. The only ones who are eligible to inherit the throne in Chang'an City are a few illegitimate princes and Yan Wang Songyu. Queen Kui died young and left no princes. The mothers of several little princes were all from small families or official families. According to clan etiquette, if there is no eldest son, the eldest son should be established, but Songji's eldest son is only 6 years old. He can't do anything even if he wears a dragon robe, and he doesn't have the support of his mother's relatives. It's useless to take the throne. But Songyu is different. Songyu is the second son of the late emperor, and a brother of Songji's mother. He was qualified to inherit the throne back then, and he is naturally qualified now. Thesis Tao Wilyu, Songyu has always been extremely talented, neither quarrelsome nor impatient, and has been teaching in the Imperial College all year round. Needless to say, as a person, everyone knows that he is a true gentleman of our time. Even if his skills are worse than Songji's, he is still better than a 6-year-old baby. The officials thought for a while, and it seemed that the only heir to the throne in Chang'an City who could stand up and take charge of the overall situation was Songyu. However, these words obviously cannot be said directly, because it is generally inappropriate to support the younger brother as emperor instead of prince. If someone says it and is rejected in the end, what will happen to the little prince after he succeeds and grows up? Clear. As a result, all the civil and military officials in the court focused their attention on the corner of the hall, waiting for Songyu to step forward. It's just that Songyu didn't seem to have any intention of fighting for the throne. He just looked sad and kept crying. It seemed that he was seriously injured by the death of his brother and had not yet recovered. Many courtiers sighed and turned their attention to the person with the highest official position present who could make decisions. It stands to reason that at this time, there is no queen, and the emperor's aunt, Queen Mother Xiao, should come out to make the decision and ask Songyu to succeed. Songyu declined several times, and then reluctantly ascended the throne. But the Queen Mother Xiao ran to the summer resort a few days ago, and she may not have received the news. Moreover, the Queen Mother Xiao is Xiao Chuiyang's sister. Let the Queen Mother make the decision, not just let Xiao Chuiyang make the decision. As a result, all civil and military officials in the court focused their attention on the 3 men, waiting for their answers. At the front of the court, Lieutenant Lu Pingyang remained silent and did not speak first, because the only candidate now was Songyu. The situation had reached this point and there was no need to deliberately manipulate it. After a moment of silence, Kui Huilu, the imperial censor, sighed and stepped forward to speak. At this moment, Xiao Chuiyang, the head of the 100 officials and the prime minister of the dynasty, stood up and said in a deep voice, "A country cannot live without a king for a day. According to etiquette and law, the emperor's eldest son Songling should be brought into the palace to succeed him. Do you have any objections?" The civil and military officials of the entire dynasty are a little confused. The situation is so clear. Your Xiao family supports the young prince, doesn't this offend Songyu? Songyu's face full of sorrow sank slightly, his eyes instantly became angry, and he quickly covered them up. Lu Pingyang was a little anxious and quickly wanted to step forward to interrupt. Kui Huilu, the censor doctor, also said, "I second the motion." There was a little noise in the court hall, and some people couldn't understand the situation. It is obvious that it is most reasonable to establish Songyu at this time. Why should we establish a little prince who doesn't know shit? If you want to control the young monarch in the court, you have to choose a peaceful day. Chang'an is almost gone. How can a 6-year-old emperor order 6 princes? But 2 of the 3 princes stood up to support the eldest son of the emperor. According to etiquette, this was indeed the case. They did not dare to refute and offend the new emperor at will. They could only look at Lu Pingyang, the Taiwei who was in charge of Dao's army. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 290. Needless to say, Lu Pingyang had been planning with Songyu for so many years just to pull Songji, who valued literature and restrained martial arts, from the throne. Songyu was only 1 step away from ascending the throne. How could he just give up the throne to Songji? Son, wouldn't it mean that his and the Han family's achievements in following the dragon are all gone? Lu Pingyang took a breath, stood up and said loudly. Now that war is about to break out, the prince is young and it is difficult to control the overall situation. I personally think that King Songyu of Yan can take on this important task. What do you think? The officials were silent and looked at Xiao Chuang and Kui Huilu, who rarely wore a pair of pants. Kui Huilu opened his mouth and was about to speak, when Prime Minister Xiao Chuang took a step forward and said with awe-inspiring justice. Since ancient times, the only distinction is to establish elders and direct descendants. While the prince is still alive, there is no reason to establish brothers as kings. Kui Huilu frowned, glanced at Xiao Chuang, and said in a deep voice. I second the motion. When the courtiers saw that Prime Minister Xiao Chuang and the imperial censor were both so determined, it was natural that they could not say more. Besides, they were suspected of forcing the palace to usurp the throne. At this time, they all nodded slightly. Second. When one person speaks, more and more people follow. As long as the courtiers agree, Songji's eldest son can be brought into the palace later. Seeing that the situation suddenly turned like this, Songyu, who had come to inherit the throne, naturally looked ugly and winked at Lu Pingyang and Hans Hongaiu. 2 military attaches, Lu Pingyang and Hans Hongaiu, have been planning for the present for so many years. How can they just draw water from a bamboo basket? Lu Pingyang quickly walked to the center of the hall and said in a deep voice. Nonsense, Prince Su's son is plotting rebellion, and the 6 kings are still unclear about their movements. Who can take charge of the overall situation at this moment? King Yan is young and talented, and he is the legitimate son of the late emperor. He should have inherited the throne. Troubled times are about to arise, how can he stand idly by? Minister, be brave and ask King Yan to inherit the throne. After saying that, he knelt down towards Songyu, and Hans Hongaiu also knelt down quickly. I sincerely request King Yan to inherit the throne. As soon as the leader of the 2 military attaches knelt down, most of the military attaches from his faction also knelt down and begged Songyu to sit on the dragon throne. Songyu did not dare to refuse politely, and walked towards the dragon chair above with a bit of sadness. Kui Huilu's face was furious and he opened his mouth to speak. Prime Minister Xiao Chuang took another step forward and said angrily. How presumptuous, Songyu, do you want to usurp the throne? Kui Huilu opened his mouth, his eyes showing a bit of irritation, but he had no choice but to follow. Xiao Xiang is right. The prince is still here, how can he mess with etiquette? Songyu paused in his steps, and when he was called out and scolded for usurping the throne, his face naturally turned red, but he did not take the step, so all his hard work was in vain, and he could only look at Lu Pingyang. Songyu was embarrassed to speak, so in order to protect Songyu, Lu Pingyang naturally argued hard and said angrily. National calamity is ahead, and troubled times are about to arise. Besides King Yan, who else in Chang'an City can take charge of the overall situation at this time? Xiao Chuang was about to speak when the sound of running suddenly came from outside the hall. Report, report. The whole place was filled with horror. In an instant, he recovered his mind and looked towards the royal road outside the palace. Outside the Taiji hall, a eunuch hurriedly ran into the gate and said urgently. Urgent report. King Su personally led an army of 80,000 people out of Qinzhou and has already passed Meiji Mountain. What? It's over. It's over. Prince Su rebelled. How could he rebel so quickly? The imperial court was instantly in a state of panic, and all the officials turned pale. Just now we were discussing whether to fight or not, now we can discuss how to fight. King Su's defense line was in the northwest, and he left Qinzhou with 80,000 troops. No need to think about it, the destination was Chang'an City, 600 miles away. If Guo Zhongxian can't stop him and runs faster, he can reach the city in 10 days, and they can go underground to discuss who should be the emperor. The court suddenly panicked, and when Lu Pingyang saw that the news of King Su's rebellion finally came, he hurriedly stood up and said loudly. King Su has rebelled. He will be able to cross Jianyang Pass and join Guo Zongxian's troops in 2 days. At this time, there is no wise king in charge. Dayo, are all doomed. I sincerely ask King Yan to succeed to the throne and take charge of the overall situation. Hans Hongao also quickly spoke in agreement. Xiao Chuang was furious and wanted to speak, but Lu Pingyang took the lead and said angrily. Here, please ask Mr. Xiao to go out. Promise. Tap tap tap. Outside the Tai Chi hall, I suddenly remembered the sound of dense footsteps. Lu Changrun and the children of the Han family rushed in with hundreds of imperial guards and surrounded the civil and military officials with official swords in hand. Lu Pingyang, do you want to usurp the throne and force the palace? Xiao Chuang immediately shouted angrily, but Lu Pingyang ignored it and just begged Song Yu to ascend the throne. The royal forest army ran over, grabbed Prime Minister Xiao Chuang and Kui Huilu, and dragged them out of the Tai Chi hall. The shouts and curses were still heard. Song Yu, Lu Pingyang, you and other rebellious officials and traitors dare to spy on the throne. I, Xiao Chuang, will kill your wolf ambitions even if I implicate the 9 clans, let me go. Kui Huilu was dragged, but he couldn't get a word in. He just yelled, me too, then he was dragged out. The remaining civil and military officials were a little hesitant, but King Su had already rebelled. If he didn't decide, something big would happen to the monarch. And looking at the sword-wielding imperial guards around them, it seemed impossible not to agree today. At this moment, they just remained silent and looked at Song Yu. Song Yu had already broken his skin and said nothing at the moment. He walked quickly to the top of the Golden Palace and sat down on the dragon chair. At this moment, all the civil and military officials breathed a sigh of relief. In any case, the matter was settled. Song Yu's body was trembling uncontrollably. She sat on the dragon chair and looked at the Imperial Road, Zuk Gate, and even Zuk Street in front of her, her eyes a little dazed. Lu Pingyang knelt down hurriedly and said loudly, Your Majesty. The matter was done, and it was impossible to pull Song Yu off the throne. The officials were silent for a while, then raised their hands and bowed. Your Majesty. Song Yu breathed a sigh of relief, looking at the civil and military officials who were sent down, brewing for a while, and preparing for years, but now he was a little speechless. Report Qiniang Pass has been closed, Guo Zhongxian led his troops to gather at Zhenhu Pass. The battle report came again. Once Jianyang Pass was closed, even gods could not get in. When Prince Su ran from Qinzhou to Chenkang, there was no time to prepare. The court officials suddenly became anxious again, and one of them hurriedly stepped forward and said, Your Majesty, please decide whether Su Buling should kill the king. Although Prince Su has stepped out of Qinzhou, he has not yet arrived at Jianyang Pass and has not yet met with Guo Zongxian's troops. It's still in time. The rest of the court officials also bowed and asked Song Yu to make a decision. If Song Yu said to fight, then fight. If Song Yu said not to fight, then talk to Prince Su. Only the emperor of the dynasty has this qualification. Once the fight with Guo Zongxian's army starts, there will be no more to talk about. Song Yu took a breath. Long before the plan, he had anticipated today's situation. The Su family must not be destroyed, otherwise he would not be able to sit firmly on the throne of the emperor, but the Su family's military power must also be reduced, so Su Buling was made a pawn. As for how to make Prince Su withdraw his troops, Song Yu had already made preparations. He put the matter of Su Buling being poisoned by the dragon locking goo on Song Ji's head, making Su Buling's regicide somewhat understandable, and then reducing the Qin and Wei states of Prince Su, so that Prince Su could save his son's life and would definitely agree. Su Buling's dragon locking goo poison will not take long, and he will die sooner or later, and it can be explained in the court. After Song Yu prepared the words, he said in a deep voice, Your Majesty. Just as Song Yu uttered a word, a noise suddenly sounded outside the palace. Song Yu and the court officials were stunned and looked outside the palace. They didn't expect that they would be so frightened that their souls would fly away. Song Ji, who had a big hole in his heart caused by a sword on the Wangjiang terrace, was carried in wearing a dragon robe and looking pale. His expression was as calm as ever, and he said softly, I am not dead yet, what are you all fighting about?